There's a new center of attention on the Seahawks offensive line. We're going to be breaking down the addition of Connor Williams coming to the Seahawks. Coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're down in Cardinals country in Tucson, Arizona, or listening from El Paso, Texas. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks were back in action at training camp, their 12th practice today, but everything that happened on the practice field ended up taking a back seat with the addition of Connor Williams finally coming to fruition. The Seahawks adding an upgrade at the center position. We're going to be diving into that breaking news and what it means for Seattle's offensive line moving forward. And then, of course, we will get to our camp takeaways, including a couple of undrafted rookies shining in the secondary. The cornerback group continues to look even better day by day for the Seahawks. This episode coming your way courtesy of FanDuel. Make every moment more. The playoffs are wrapped up. The sports have stopped sporting the way we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As the wheels have kept on turning, fans have been wondering, is Connor Williams ever actually going to sign with the Seattle Seahawks? It's been 2 weeks since his free agent visit. He's met with a bunch of other teams yesterday. The Ravens met with him. His agent, Drew Rosenhaus, yesterday was saying that he was on the verge of signing, was negotiating with the Seahawks. Other teams were in the mix. So fans were just hoping and praying Connor Williams was going to sign to give the Seahawks an upgraded center. And it turns out it happened just 1 day later. According to Adam Schefter, a 1-year deal worth up to $6 million. He passed his physical a couple weeks ago at Seattle's visit. Based on Drew Rosenhaus's comment, sounds like he is going to be ready to go for week 1. So, Rob, we can set the stage here right now. He tore his ACL in December, and yet it's looking like there's a very good chance he is going to be on the practice field quickly after the Seahawks now get him inked up. And that kind of a contract is $6 million. There's no way he's not signing as the starter, right? I mean, the competition's got to be over.
Yeah, assuming that he is truly healthy, Corbin, there's no doubt in my mind Connor Williams is your starting center. I think that he is the best center that this club has had since, I don't know, Max Unger. You go back in the day, you think of Kevin Mawai, you think of Blair Bush as some of the best centers the Seahawks have ever had. None of them were 6'5", 300-pounders who have the experience at tight end, at left tackle, at guard, and at center as he started with the Miami Dolphins a year ago before going down with that knee injury. That has been the bugaboo with Connor Williams dating back to his days. The Texas Longhorns, Corbin, is that it's been durability. But when he is healthy, his athletic ability, his size, his length, again, 6'5", 300 pounds, 5.02 in the 40-yard dash after being a 3-year starter at the left tackle position for the Texas Longhorns all those years ago. It was a second-round selection by the Dallas Cowboys, primarily played guard for them and then went to the Miami Dolphins and played center. His athletic ability, his quickness off the snap, his ability to get to the second level and be a dominant run blocker, as well as a very, very effective pass blocker. Corbin, this is the center that Seahawks fans have been just pounding the table for a decade or more. He really does feel like a perfect fit in this system. As you said, the agent representing him is Drew Rosenhaus. And so when the reports were coming out that the Seahawks were, within a day or two possibly of signing him, my memory went all the way back to a certain University of Miami running back, Willis McGahee, who Drew Rosenhaus famously had pick up a phone during draft day just to suggest that he was about to get selected. And of course, he wound up being selected in the first round by the Buffalo Bills all those years ago. Drew Rosenhaus is one of the absolute best at kind of playing that game, but the Seahawks played their own game, bringing in a Pro Bowl caliber center that I really think could give the Seattle Seahawks the best offensive line in the NFC West division. And Corbin, when was the last time that you were able to say that with a straight face?
Yeah, I mean, with what's going on with Trent Williams' contract situation in San Francisco, too, it might seem like crazy talk, but Connor Williams, I tweeted this out earlier. I don't care if it's called X right now. I'm still saying I tweeted this out, that the Seahawks floor for their offensive line just went way up. But most importantly, their ceiling just went way up. Now, Abraham Lucas is going to be the other lever there that determines what this offensive line is capable of doing this year. You got to get him back healthy, got to get him off the PUP list. But this is a player last year. Granted, he only started 9 games because he had that ACL injury in early December. But in those 9 games, Rob, he gave up 6 total pressures in pass protection. The year before, he gave up less than 20, playing over 600 pass blocking snaps. He's given up 4 sacks the last 2 years combined, just 1 last year. Almost a 99% pass block efficiency rate. He was near the top, like in the top 3 of every meaningful advanced stat that Pro Football Focus had last year. And then when you watch the tape, you can see the movement skills. You can see the run blocking ability, the pass protection. He is a complete package player at that center position, and the numbers back it up. So there were some fans that I saw when this news came out. Well, could he be a guard? No, the Seahawks are not going to be playing him at guard. This was all about the center position. And what's ironic about it is when Ryan Grubb was answering questions today after practice, he was asked about the competition. Oluwatimi and Nick Harris, those two have kind of been rotating with the first team the last week. Things had opened up some. And Ryan Grubb said, they're both doing great. But apparently it's like the quarterback position. If you've got 2 centers, you don't have one. So the Seahawks went out and got themselves one in Connor Williams.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. For one, I do believe that Connor Williams could play the guard position. I just don't think that position is nearly as deep, or nearly as much of a concern, for the Seahawks because it's deeper than the center position. Look, Oluwatimi is a quality center, in my opinion. I made this point in yesterday's show. I really do believe that he could come into the NFL and be a serviceable starter. But I also think that his best attribute is his power. I mean, this is a 6'3", 320-pound kind of a bowling ball at the center position. Where again, with Connor Williams, you're talking about one of the truly elite athletes that is in the NFL as an interior offensive line. I just think that it gives their offensive line a whole different element in terms of the quickness, in terms of the types of plays that they might be able to call. And then again, going back to that play caller, Ryan Grubb, of course, he has learned the art of kind of the tongue-in-cheek answers, considering the fact that for a week or 2 there, he was a member of the Alabama Crimson Tide before he switched back over here to Seattle. So I think that he's kind of used to those type of comments. And then again, as excited as I'm about Oluwatimi, as excited as I am about the essentially the coach on the field that is Nick Harris, there is just no comparison. Connor Williams is a massive upgrade to the Seahawks at the center position. And again, I just think that it makes their offense that much more dynamic, explosive. And you use the word floor and ceiling. I would 100% agree with you. This makes the Seahawks better just by his putting the cap on. And the upside here with this group now could be one of the better pass protecting offensive lines in a long time. And again, that's exactly what you're hoping for Geno Smith to be able to put up the type of numbers he put up 2 seasons ago and get the Seahawks back into the postseason.
And the other thing that I love about this, I know there's some fans saying, why didn't you get a multi-year deal? And there were discussions. I talked to a couple sources today after the fact that there were discussions about making this a 2-year deal, but ultimately the 2 sides opted for this 1-year pact. What's nice about this is Connor Williams is 27 years old. It's not like this is an aging player. Yes, he's coming off an injury, but he is in the prime years of his career. He's only going to be going into his 3rd year as a center, so there's still room for him to grow in that regard. If he is healthy and plays well, this could be a guy that John Schneider says, hey, middle of the season, I'm going to break most of my trends here. We're going to get you extended, because this has been a position that the Seahawks, as we've talked about over and over again, Rob, this is a position that the Seahawks have really neglected. And the last time that they paid this kind of money for a center, The last contract that had big bucks, this is going to make you laugh, Rob, but BJ Finney got $4.5 million guaranteed in 2020, and I don't think he even played a game for the Seahawks before getting traded as part of the deal to get Carlos Dunlap. But that just tells you they have been going cheap. They've been rotating guys in there. This gives them a chance to potentially have a long-term starter that is worth paying big bucks for if he's fully healthy. So this is not a knock on Oluwatimi. I think he can start in the league, but the ceiling aspect, I don't know that he can be a top 5 center. Connor Williams already has proven that he can be that, and he's 27 years old. So Seattle's hoping that he is going to be one of those pieces that really gets this offensive line over the hump, and that could get the rest of this offense rolling. You could have a top 5 unit with the weapons they have on the outside if the offensive line takes a big step forward with their new pivot man. When we come back, we're going to be shifting back to training camp, and in specifics, we're going to be talking about some of the undrafted rookies. It had been kind of a quiet camp for undrafted rookies, but that is starting to change at the VMAC. We're going to dive into a couple breakout stars from today's practice. That'll be coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you'd do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a bit more time to make heavy metal music. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you could do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with your licensed therapist, and switch therapist anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by Rob Rang, my co-host in crime. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen today. For your second listen, make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Get your daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Seahawks concluding their 12th training camp practice today at the VMAC. Took the pads off, and it's understandable. For one thing, when you're seeing the number of defensive linemen that are currently a little bit banged up for the Seahawks, they decided, let's take the pads off and ramp back on the physicality here for a day. I suspect the pads will be back out at practice tomorrow. So that is the one thing we have to use as a disclaimer here, Rob, that you can only evaluate things so much when it's an OTA style contact prohibited practice. You have to really pull back a little bit, and it makes the evaluation process tougher from a football standpoint. But if there is a position group that you can evaluate really well in these style practices, it's receivers versus corners. And it's been a quiet training camp for undrafted rookies. In fact, I posted this a couple of days ago. Most of the guys that were initially signed in that first wave of undrafted free agents, they're not even on the roster for the Seahawks anymore 2 weeks into training camp. So this didn't feel like a Pete Carroll year where you had 2 or 3 guys that really were emerging in that undrafted crop. Yet here we are a few days later, and now we've got a couple guys that have really decided to show up and make a statement. And today, it was Carlton Johnson, the free agent out of Fresno State. And we've talked about the depth at corner, Rob, how many talented players the Seahawks have. That seemed like the least likely position that an undrafted rookie was going to have any chance to make a splash for this football team. But he had one of the best practices that any player has had in this training camp today. I counted 5 pass breakups by Carlton Johnson today. One of them led to an interception by another undrafted rookie, D. Williams, who started as a receiver at the beginning of training camp. They moved into corner, and he has quietly been playing really well over the last couple of days. And we know his kick and punt return ability, that could be a key for him making the football team. And if he's playing some quality corner to go with it, you got yourself a potential home run undrafted rookie. But Johnson was really the star of the day, had a pass breakup 1-on-1 against Jackson Smith and Jigba in 7-on-7, had a couple other really nice ones where he got his hand out in front of the receiver, swatted away. The only catch I saw him give up, he was draped all over the receiver and limited the target to, I believe, 5 yards. I mean, he was near lockdown today, and we know the guy can fly. That 4.28 speed was showing up, getting to the football today.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth there with the 4.28 speed that Carlton Johnson possesses. I mean, this is a guy who has electric speed. He has great change of direction. He has been a productive player when it comes to pass breakups back at Fresno State. One of a corner who doesn't panic when the ball is in the air. He will face guard, get his hands up, and be able to kind of knock the ball down without drawing penalties. And so that's one of the fascinating things about Carlton Johnson is that, again, he has the straight line speed and can turn and move with wide receivers and also doesn't panic in coverage. The question that you have about Carlton Johnson on tape, at least at Fresno State, was the physicality. So it's not a surprise to me that, that some of the missed tackles that we saw at Fresno State, that's not going to show up, especially in an unpadded practice like today was. And Adam Durde basically characterizes like, okay, this was a splashy performance from Carlton Johnson today. Let's see if he can kind of stack up those wins, when the pads return. Still, I think that all of the talent in the world is there with Carlton Johnson. And so you are encouraged by this performance, especially the fact that, of course, again, this is game week. The Seahawks are going to be facing the Los Angeles Chargers. They have some question marks at the wide receiver position. Their star quarterback, Justin Herbert, went down with the injury earlier in the preseason, so he is clearly not going to play in this game. There are going to be some playmaking opportunities for corners, in this preseason game Saturday night. So again, Carlton Johnson, that's very encouraging news. D. Williams, as you mentioned, is a former wide receiver. His ability to make plays on the ball and then take him back to the house on the flip side, I think is, again, one of the things that's most exciting about those two particular undrafted free agents. But Corbin, we're just kind of scratching the surface. I mean, we've talked so much about the Boise State running back, George Holani. That's another undrafted free agent who has been very intriguing. I'll mention a wide receiver. Hayden Hatton is a player that, Thor Nystrom, our buddy, talked about, several weeks ago, and we had him on as some of the players that the Seahawks signed in that second wave of free agency, undrafted free agency, I should say, that he really thought had a chance to pop. Hayden Hatton, when the Seahawks released their official/unofficial depth chart for the first time today, Hayden Hatton running with the twos, I think caught some people by surprise a little bit, but we've talked about his ball skills, his body control. So again, to me, the four undrafted free agents that we got to be talking about from this year's draft class: Carlton Johnson, the corner from Fresno State, again, D. Williams, the corner/receiver from Tennessee, George Holani, the running back from Boise State, Hayden Hatton from Idaho. 3 of the 4 being on the West. We know the West Coast is the best coast, not only in terms of weather and people, but in terms of football as well. There are undrafted free agents year in and year out from this region that wind up surprising people. I think the Seahawks have a couple of those diamond in the roughs again this year as well.
I don't see Hatton being on the radar right now to make this football team at receiver just because of the amount of talent in front of him. I don't think he has stood out that much, but I'm going to throw one other name in here for you, Rob, because we talked George Holani yesterday. He had another good day today. Ryan Grubb was gushing about him when I asked about the third down competition. So he is very much in the hunt for a roster spot. But Nelson Caesar is starting to make his presence felt. And it's interesting that it's happening with Darrell Taylor sidelined by an injury right now. He's missed 4 straight practices. And Nelson Caesar had a couple of what would have been sacks yesterday going against Stone Forsythe. Today had a couple nice plays. I know it was unpadded, but he was in good position against the run. And we know that's been a major issue for Darrell Taylor his entire NFL career. So keep an eye on number 46, Nelson Caesar. He has certainly been a guy that is starting to show up when you put him with Carlton Johnson, D. Williams. That interception was a great play by him. It was a diving pick, and it came off of a carom from Carlton Johnson, who looked like he was beat by Laviska Shenault. But this is where having 4.28 speed comes into play. You can recover against athletic receivers. And that's what he did. He recovered on a corner route and was able to get there to get a hand on the football. And then D. Williams was in a perfect place. Williams ended up preventing a touchdown later in the team drill when Sam Howell bailed out to his right and thought he was going to get an open receiver, and Williams just blanketed the receiver in the back of the end zone. There was nowhere for him to go. So we're seeing some of these undrafted guys really start to rise the occasion, because it had been a quiet camp on that front, but things are starting to change a little bit. So I don't know how many of these guys are going to be on the 53-man roster, but certainly Mike McDonald, Adam Durde, Ryan Grubb, like, they are paying close attention to several of these guys who are starting to make a little bit of a wave here at training camp for the Seattle Seahawks. When we come back, we're going to continue with our training camp day 12 takeaways, because even though it was a non-padded practice, there was a lot going on today, and the Olympics are going on. So it's fitting that we're going to continue talking about a lot of speed. That'll be coming up here next on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends at FanDuel. We love sports. We love them so much. We don't want them to stop. But with the playoffs, the NBA and NHL long gone, we get fewer games. The sports aren't sportsing like we want them to, but FanDuel allows us to keep the sports going whenever we want. All we have to do is open the app and dream up the bets anytime we're in the mood. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 win or lose. Is Jason Tatum going to play more than 20 minutes for the U.S. men's basketball team in their next game? Does Byron Murphy II have a strong shot at winning NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year? Can Vlad Guerrero get to 19 games with his current hitting streak for the Blue Jays? You can bet on it all in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com and add a big win to your summer bucket list today. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Normally, we would have one of our training camp interviews here in this third slot, and we've still got several that we're going to get to here in upcoming shows. But with the Connor Williams news and the fact that a lot happened on the practice field today, we've got a lot more takeaways to dive into. And it's fitting, Rob. It's the middle of the Olympics right now. We got to see that photo finish the other night in the men's 100-meter dash that literally was just looked like it was just a sleeve that ended up winning it for Lyles. It's fitting that we are talking about speed in this episode. We already talked about Carlton Johnson with that 4.28 speed that he has showing up. One of the three fastest players in the Seahawks roster. The other two, DK Metcalf and Riq Woolen, they have been battling back and forth. It has been must-see entertainment throughout training camp with those two going against each other. Even after the snap, they've gotten into it with each other a couple of times. They had to be separated by coaches, so the competitive juice is going beyond the whistle with these two. But today, it was DK Metcalf's turn to win the day, because Riq Woolen, he's had some really good practices. He's made some big plays on Metcalf, but today, Metcalf and Geno Smith, they were on one. Metcalf scored against Trey Brown at the beginning of the team session, but the two plays that really jumped out, a perfectly thrown deep ball. DK Metcalf had 2 or 3 steps on Riq Woolen, and I don't know that there's many receivers, Rob, that can say this. He ended up pulling away from Riq Woolen after catching the football. Like, that just does not happen to Riq Woolen very often, but DK Metcalf is a speed freak in his own right. 65-yard touchdown, and he later added another 50-yarder where Geno Smith feathered it to him after he'd gotten a couple steps separation on Riq Woolen. And this was really one of those ultimate showcases. Again, DK Metcalf is in year 6, and I still sometimes marvel the fact a man of this size can move the way that he can and make one of the fastest players in the NFL and Riq Woolen look slow pulling away from him on deep balls.
Yeah, DK Metcalf is just a whole different level of athlete than anybody, frankly, I've ever seen in a Seahawk uniform. I mean, that's regardless of position. I mean, the man's straight line speed, his size combination is just unbelievable. And there's two games in particular, and anybody who has been watching the Seahawks for the last several years probably is going to be able to remember these plays. The touchdown reception against the Dallas Cowboys this past season, where he catches the ball up the middle and just races away from everybody else. That's a damn talented Dallas Cowboys secondary that he made look foolish. I believe it was on Monday Night Football. It certainly was a primetime game.
Thursday night. It was Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, exactly. So the primetime game environment and DK Metcalf, played so well in that particular case. And then, of course, when he chased down Budda Baker, who ran a 4.3 himself back in the day at the University of Washington, and saved that defensive touchdown away. It took that away from the Arizona Cardinals. Again, just two plays that demonstrate the sheer athletic ability of DK Metcalf. And from based on what you've just said and the reports that I've received from others at training camp practice today as well, it sounds like DK Metcalf just had another one of those splashy performances. And Corbin, I kind of said it tongue in cheek before, the West Coast is the best coast and all that kind of stuff. I think that DK Metcalf might be a perfect example of that. I'm starting to listen to some of the fantasy football talking heads out there, and I just don't hear DK Metcalf's name uttered enough. And I really do think that this is the year that we see him absolutely explode. I think that he is a perfect fit in Ryan Grubb's offense. And I'll jump into another player who also would be among the top 5 fastest players in the Seahawks roster right now, who I think is about to splash. And I'm going to change what I said a couple of weeks ago, where I really thought that Zach Charbonnet might be able to steal some runs away, some touchdowns, especially away from Ken Walker III. It sounds like, based on what Ryan Grubb was saying and what my eyes and ears have told me over the last couple of weeks and watching the Seahawks, the Ken Walker III is also on the precipice of a breakout campaign as well. So again, if DK Metcalf and Ken Walker III have the type of spectacular individual seasons I think they're about to, again, it feels very likely that the Seahawks might be back in the postseason. And again, the addition of the center Connor Williams, as we talked about a couple of moments ago, is only going to make it that much easier for both DK Metcalf and Ken Walker III to have those type of performances.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Ken Walker situation, because I was starting to be in that camp thinking this might be a closer to 50-50 timeshare, because Zach Charbonnet has had a good camp too. But seeing some of the comments out there about what Kennedy Palomalu thinks about Ken Walker III, if Kennedy Palomalu, the new running back coach, if he thinks that Ken Walker III is a bell cow, which everything that I'm hearing indicates that he believes that should be a guy that's getting 20 carries a game plus. If Kennedy Palomalu thinks Ken Walker III is that player, I think you should probably listen to what he's saying, because he's had a couple of rushing title winners. He had a couple other guys that were very close to winning rushing titles. Kennedy Palomalu knows what stud running backs look like. And so if he thinks Ken Walker III is that player, and Walker is bigger this year, he added some muscle to his frame. Doesn't look any slower with it either. He is still extremely explosive. But Rob, looking at him in training camp, not only has he joined the Bald Club, so he's in my card there, but he just looks like a different player physically. He's not much bigger, but I'd say another 5 pounds of muscle. And I think that's going to help from a durability standpoint for him this year. As far as wrapping up takeaways, because we've looked at DK, we've looked at Riq Woolen. That was really one of the big highlights for today. But I want to give Sam Howell some props, because you and I don't want to say that I've trashed him, but he hasn't been accurate. That's just the reality. He has been erratic throughout this training camp, and there has been a massive gap between him and Geno Smith. I'm going to sit here right now and say that did not change anything today, because Geno Smith was awesome today, and he was throwing those bombs to DK Metcalf, quick release, really tight spirals. But Sam Howell made some of his best throws today. He had a touchdown that he feathered into Cody White along the sideline for a 25-yarder. Maybe his best throw was one that wasn't caught. And this is an unfortunate downside here in training camp, is that you're going to have plays where there's players that don't look good. And D. Eskridge had 2 drops in a 3-play span, a player that cannot afford to have anything like that happen on the practice field right now. Howell threw an absolute bullet down the seam, threaded it between 2 oncoming safeties, and put it right in the money, and D. Eskridge didn't even get a hand on it. He put both of his hands up, and it looked like a field goal going through the upright. Didn't get a hand on it, and then 2 plays later, over Artie Burns, who's having a great training camp. Burns had really good coverage, and Howell got the ball past him and got it to Eskridge, only for it to bounce off the receiver's chest and then fall to the ground. That would have been a touchdown, back of the right end zone. So I'm looking at this from kind of a negative and positive standpoint. Sam Howell is not getting helped by those second-team receivers, particularly D. Eskridge. So he had some big plays that were taken away from him today, but this was the first practice where I felt like, from a consistency standpoint, he was getting the football to his receivers. He wasn't overthrowing. He wasn't airmailing throws. He looked much more comfortable. He was moving the pocket. He scrambled to complete a few throws. And so you're seeing him starting to figure things out in this offense. He just needs his guys to catch the damn football.
And he really does. And that's the thing is, the more I read and watch and hear about Sam Howell, the more I'm reminded of a former Tacoma-based quarterback that started for the Seahawks, and that being John Kitna. And I see more dynamic precision passing from Sam Howell at his best. The ceiling with Sam Howell is higher than I ever saw with John Kitna. But I also see a gamer. I see a guy who I think is going to continue to make just kind of incremental strides and getting a little bit more familiar with Ryan Grubb's offense and be successful. And when he's actually in the game itself, that's where I think you're going to see kind of that playground type of ability really kind of shine through. He is not as as accurate, as consistent as Geno Smith. That has been proven over and over again so far throughout this process. But again, I do feel very strongly that the Seahawks got themselves a quality backup quarterback in Sam Howell, who does have some upside to him. And I'm fascinated with the opportunity that Sam Howell, as well as PJ Walker, are going to have ahead of themselves, not only with the Chargers coming up, but the rest of the preseason, where I think the Seahawks are going to be wise to kind of keep Geno Smith, for the most part, on the sideline and see what their backup quarterbacks can do. I think that Sam Howell is going to surprise some people during this preseason game slate.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we've got another training camp practice, more takeaways coming your way, and we're going to continue our one-on-one interview series, Laviska Shenault, the newest addition to the Seahawks receiving corps. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. Go Hawks.